to be able to recognize Mr. Crenshaw, who's joining our committee this morning, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Lizzie Fletcher. Thank you, Ranking Member Randy Weber, for having me. I appreciate this. This is a huge interest of mine. And I appreciate this committee, by the way, for allowing my bill, the Leading Act, which repurposes grant money from DOE for carbon capture in the natural gas sector, and adding that to legislation in this committee. And this is a really important subject, because the question is not whether about supporting environmentalism or supporting cleaner air. The question is about how we do it and what the best way to do that is, and playing to our strengths as Americans. And that strength is innovation. That strength is technology. We could do something like implement a Green New Deal and ban fossil fuels, and we would take care of maybe 15% of, not maybe, definitely 15% of emissions worldwide. Okay. We would also destroy our economy. And we'd have a negligible effect on the environment. There's other ideas out there from leading presidential candidates to, say, ban fracking. That would be an interesting shock to the economy and really put any of these ideas right out of business. It would also be interesting because, and Dr. Krishnamurthy, as you mentioned in your testimony, there's been a 20% reduction in emissions per capita, largely because of natural gas. It begs the question. There was another study by DOE that showed if we replace China and India's coal-burning boilers with natural gas, they would reduce their emissions by 40%. You add carbon capture to that mix, and you're talking 90% reductions. So focusing on what works is so unbelievably important. So I want to get to that, and what barriers are in the way, what government needs to do to help this and actually get us to an eventual net zero emissions. Dr. Krishnamurthy, you have briefly touched on this, and I saw a little bit more of it in your written testimony about reclassifying CO2 as a commodity as opposed to a waste. And that's interesting. So is there a regulatory barrier there?
Yes, it is considered a waste item today. It's considered not a commodity that can be economically advantaged for a broad group of people, and therefore cannot access common carrier pipelines. And that becomes that's perhaps the biggest challenge today to moving CO2 around.
Is that an EPA regulation?
I'm not sure. I can get back to you on that one. Yes, okay. It's a NAAQS requirement.
And that's the other, Mr. Kennedy, I'd like to go to you on everything you all have done. And I want to ask about where you're at now financially. I mean, we have to get companies like yours in a place where you want to do it, where the financial incentives work and it's viable. Are you at that place now?
Yeah, I think as we've said before, that the economics on these projects are very, very challenging. Mm-hmm. So we eagerly await for the 45Q guidance that we're awaiting from the IRS, and we continue to think that the technology providers need to drive cost out of the project to make these more attractive to new investors.
So without the 45Q credits, you don't think your project would be viable?
I think new projects are very, very difficult. So we're a little bit unique in the fact that we vertically integrated. We have an ownership interest in the oil field. I think going forward, you're going to see technology, and you're going to see utility companies or power plant owners to want to do a fence line sale of CO2.
And could you briefly talk about the new source review regulations? Is there a reason you guys didn't retrofit? You decided to build an entirely new facility. Is that because of regulations like the new source review?
It did not play into ours. We were challenged by the Department of Energy to demonstrate we can do this without having an impact on energy prices. So as opposed to being parasitic to the host coal unit and taking power and steam from that unit, we opted to build the cleaner burning gas cogen facility. Okay. So that resulted in not only getting our power and steam, we have excess power off that facility that we sell into the grid. So we've actually added power supply.
And as far as scaling up these technologies, because we've been talking about that constantly, so we agree on a 45Q tax credit, for instance. We agree on grant money from DOE for pilot programs. Again, that's basically what my legislation is. What else? What other barriers are there? And this would go to Mr. Dewing as well. or anybody can answer this really, I mean, what other barriers are there that we need to get rid of, and what do you need help with? Where is that light touch of assistance that we need?
I think the continued support, the DOE support for grants to get projects going, the 45Q helps. For EOR, we can sell the CO2, so that helps. If there's not a, if no one needs the CO2, then we don't get that money. But the key thing to me is where do you put it? We need the ability to put the CO2 somewhere. So we need the pipelines, we need the connections, we need the storage locations. So if you can have the infrastructure for CO2, I think that would be a seed for lots of smaller projects, because then they can see where that CO2 can go. Okay.
And Dr. Krishnamurti, I want to go back to you. I mentioned before that there's talk of actually banning fracking right now. Mm-hmm. Could you just comment on what the consequences of something like that would be if it happened tomorrow?
If it happened tomorrow, the growth in Permian that we anticipate going from 3.5 million barrels a day to 7.5 million barrels per day will stop. And that's the kind of thing that's not only given us energy independence, but has enabled us to be a net exporter of crude.
Well, what's the environmental impact, though?
So it can be done well, right? So fracking can be done well, and we've seen that being demonstrated many, many, many times.
Well, let me be more specific. What would the environmental impact be on emissions if we just stopped using natural gas all of a sudden?
Well, we've got to find that energy somewhere. We need a lot of energy. We'll probably go back and restart coal-fired power plants. We might start to look at expanding some of our nuclear power resources.
Would there be most likely an increase in emissions or a decrease? Absolutely, an increase in emissions. That would be a problem, because I don't think we all want that. I'm not sure what my time is, but I'll keep talking as long as I can. Thank you, Chairwoman, very much for indulging me. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Crenshaw. As we